Well, one of the stories that happens in the book of Joshua, I think that's a very difficult story for a lot of people as they read it, is the story of Achan. Can you fill us in a little bit on what happens with Achan and
Yeah, so in Jericho, they're called not to take any of the spoils. And Achan violates that and secretly takes some gold and some clothing, some valuable clothing, and buries it under his tent and thinks nobody's the wiser. And unfortunately, God knows. And when they go to fight at Ai, they are not successful. And it turns out it comes down to the lack of faithfulness by Achan is the reason. And so, Achan and ultimately he's singled out in his family, and they're wiped out. They're swallowed up by the land.
yeah. So interesting in this story is there's some symbolism and some patterns that are at work in this story, and the first one is that the whole people are unsuccessful against Ai because of one person's unfaithfulness. Now, what are we to learn from that or to make from that as we look at the story? Because that's one of those things that seems very supernatural and far-fetched, but what is it that we're to understand from that?
Right. It's one of those things, we could talk about the fly in the ointment or a little leaven can leaven the whole lump kind of a thing, but oftentimes, one person's influence can't really be that significant. And, say, a father can ruin a family and things of this sort.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of times where we, as human beings, would rather that what we did didn't matter, because that releases us.
And yet we want to matter.
Right. And that's the funny thing is, as human beings, we're stuck between, really on the horns of this dilemma of wanting the things that we do to really matter and wanting the things that we do to not matter, because then we're free from doing anything. So we're caught on the horns of this dilemma, and I think that's one of the things that this story really brings out, is that the things that you do really matter, and they matter to the entire community, and you are part of that community, and you have a part to play in that community, and when you play that part that you've been given, then you have great power to glorify the community. When you don't play that part, you have great power in bringing that community down. And what's really interesting is, I think in the modern world, it's very, the way that this manifests itself, the horns of this dilemma kind of present themselves, is that we're very concerned about the Uyghurs in China, and we're very concerned with how Tibet is being treated, and we're very concerned with the rainforest down in the Amazon. But we tend to not be as concerned with our relationships, within our own household, and whether or not we're really making the most of those opportunities. You know what I'm saying? And I think that
we're really concerned with things that aren't my personal problems.
Right. Because it's easier to strike a pose of responsibility and commitment with that. I can put a bumper sticker on my car that says "Free Tibet," and I show how concerned I am with something around halfway around the world. In the meantime, I'm not raising my children with any kind of sacrifice or intentionality, because that's difficult.
Because there's not a bumper sticker for that.
Right, exactly. And I think that the point here is really interesting, because Achan hides these devoted things in his tent, and it's not just Achan that's affected by this. It's his entire family. And the other thing that's really fascinating is that he takes some of the devoted things, some of the things of Canaan that are devoted to destruction, and really what ends up happening is he ends up sharing in the Canaanites' destruction because of that. So let's talk about that for a moment here. What is it that we're to make about how that part of the story unfolds? Is there any kind of life lesson to be learned from the fact that he takes these things that belong to the Canaanites and something that's devoted to destruction and ends up being destroyed himself?
For me, the only thing that really came to mind was, nipping things in the bud, so to speak. And as a parent, when you see harmful behavior in your children, the earlier you come down on it and catch it and go against it, the less time it has to wreak destruction in your kid's life. But I think you're kind of going something a little more specific.
Well, what's interesting about it is that if you look all the way from the garden through the Bible, is that God's wisdom, so to speak, is a way that glorifies you, and the net result of that is the glorification of the things around you. And Adam and Eve's sin, you could say, would be to choose their own glory at the expense of the glory of the things around them. And both of them are an attempt to search for glory. And when Achan takes some of these things that are glorious but devoted to destruction, there's a sense in which it's a replay of the sin of the garden, that he's taking something of glory that God has told him to be careful of. And so he's bringing sin and death into his house. And I think that it's very easy to see in the culture around us somebody doing something and succeeding, somebody succeeding and getting glory from themselves, and to not see the cost of that to the people around them. I mean, especially in our day of social media, because what you see in social media looks so good, but you don't see the arguing, the fighting, the hurt feelings. You don't see that in the photo on the post or the little video clip. All you see is, oh, we're doing this great thing, we have that great thing. But you don't see the expense to that. And so it's easy to take that for yourself. It's easy to say, well, I want some of that, I'm going to do that as well. And the problem is that you can be bringing death and destruction, not only for yourself, but for your entire household. And that happens all the time. I mean, how many people do we know that have seen something on TV, some kind of lifestyle that they see on TV and think, oh, it's so great. I know of somebody who decided to blow up their entire family because they saw a lifestyle being presented on TV that looked so great, and they decided to follow that. And they destroyed themselves, and they destroyed their entire family doing it. And I think that this is just it's a cautionary tale for us, that this kind of stuff still happens, and you have to be very careful with it. In understanding the punishment to Achan, it seems very harsh, I think, to us as modern people. How do we reconcile that with a loving God in our minds?
Well, I think we look at it in the bigger context of the Old Testament that we've covered so far. I mean, it has not been difficult for mankind to kind of come off the rails. Mm-hmm. We don't get too many generations down the road where God's like sparing Noah and his family and starting over. Mm-hmm. And now we've just kicked, at least 6 different people groups out of the land and starting over. Mm-hmm. And so I take that it's very easy for a group of people to become corrupted, and every effort has to be made to prevent that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that God, what we see as harshness, we see that way because we don't think about it's kind of the broken window fallacy of economics. I'm sure you're familiar with that, where if a window gets broken, the store owner of that needs to replace the window is going to spend money on having that window replaced, and that's going to stimulate the economy. And so why don't we just go break all the windows, right? And the reason that fallacy exists is because you see the broken window and you see the economic activity that took place. What you don't see is the economic activity that didn't take place. That this guy already had a window, and now he spent his money and he still only has a window. Whereas if the window hadn't been broken, he would have gone out and spent that money on something else and had something more. And I think that we kind of get into that same fallacy when we read the Bibles. We look at what happened to Achan, and his family, but we don't see what would have happened maybe to the entire Israelite nation had God not acted. And so I think that this story is a great story, and a lot of the stories in the Bible that are hard to look at are really actually very great stories that if we would take the time to really look at them.
Well, it's interesting because you say we don't really get to see what would have happened had God not acted, but we do get quite a few examples of the Israelites,
Right.
and
Right.
seeing what them going awry.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you see how easily they win a race. It's not hard to extrapolate, is it? Yeah, I think that's true.